In 1990, an entire family vanished without a trace. The front door was locked. The dinner table was still set, and their 2 cars were parked in the driveway. But inside the house, silence. No blood, no broken windows, no forced entry. The police called it abandonment. The neighbors called it unbelievable. And for 15 years, no one knew where the Carsons went, until a night watchman doing routine checks found a loose panel in the basement floor. And beneath it, the steel hatch. Inside, a hidden bunker. Cold, sealed, silent. And what he found inside rewrote everything. Welcome to Uncommon Stories. If this story stays with you, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from and when the truth found you. Now, let's begin. The Carson family lived in a quiet corner of Fairfield County, Ohio, on a hill where the woods begin to thicken and where the stars can still be seen at night. It was a 2-story house with faded red shutters and ivy along the back wall. The kind of house you'd pass on a summer drive and barely notice. But inside, it was full of life. David Carson, 42, an insurance claims adjuster who coached Little League on weekends. Elaine Carson, 39, a high school English teacher, lover of poetry, Sunday crossword puzzles, and playing piano barefoot. Their kids, Sarah, 12, and Mikey, just 9, were the kind of siblings who fought over cereal and stayed up late giggling with flashlights. Neighbors remember them as quiet, kind, and predictable, until they were gone. It was the morning of June 3rd, 1990, a Sunday. The mailman noticed something odd, a growing stack of newspapers at the Carson doorstep, 5 days' worth. He told the neighbor. The neighbor tried calling. No answer. Later that evening, that same neighbor, Tom Withers, walked up the Carson's driveway. Both cars were still there, a beige sedan and a navy blue station wagon. The porch light was on. The TV flickered inside. But when Tom knocked, nothing happened. He called police. The responding officer found the door locked, but no sign of distress. When they entered, the air was stale. Still, plates were set on the table, 4 places. A meal halfway through. Elaine's reading glasses still sat on the couch. Upstairs, the beds were made. Drawers closed. Nothing out of place. But the house felt wrong. Too still. Too empty. No notes. No calls. No signs of travel. Every document, birth certificates, passports, IDs, were untouched. Cash still sat in a kitchen drawer. Only one thing was missing. The family. Fairfield police launched a formal investigation the next day. They combed through bank records, phone lines, employment contacts. David hadn't accessed his accounts in 6 days. Elaine hadn't shown up to work. No one had called in. The school assumed she was on leave. But no one could explain why the Carsons, a family with no criminal record, no debt, no signs of stress, would simply leave. The working theory? Voluntary disappearance. Some said cult. Others said witness protection. But there were no signs to support either. And within a month, the case grew cold. The house sat empty for over a year. Then the bank foreclosed. It changed owners 4 times. No one stayed more than a few months. They said it was too quiet. They said the basement was wrong. They said sometimes they heard footsteps that didn't match theirs. By 2005, the property had been vacant for almost 3 years, until a private security firm was hired to do weekly walkthroughs to make sure squatters hadn't moved in. One of those guards was Henry Lowell, 57 years old, semi-retired, and not particularly superstitious. He'd been to the Carson house 6 times. Always routine. Until the night of October 19th, 2005. It was raining. Hard. He entered through the garage and noticed something strange in the basement. A section of the floor, laminate over old concrete, felt hollow. He tapped it with his boot, then knelt, and saw a seam, a perfect square, maybe 3 feet wide, hidden under a rug and a warped storage cabinet. He pulled it up. Beneath it, a steel hatch, locked from the inside, but aged, rusted. He called it in. And what came next shook Fairfield and the nation. Police forced the hatch open around 2:30 a.m. A smell escaped, not of rot, but of cold metal and mold. The stairs led down 10 feet into a concrete chamber, roughly the size of a single room. No windows, no lights, and then the beam of a flashlight swept across the floor and stopped for bodies, lined up, side by side. 2 adult, 2 child, each fully clothed, each untouched, as if placed carefully, quietly. Forensics later confirmed it was a Carson family. Cause of death, asphyxiation, likely from sealed air, but not accidental. They hadn't walked into the bunker. They'd been put there. But how and why? There was no blood upstairs, no signs of struggle, no break-in, no alarm tripped, and that's when investigators found it. A scuff mark behind the TV cabinet, and behind that a wall safe, still locked. They cracked it open. Inside, a tape. VHS, labeled in red marker. Don't watch unless you want the truth. They watched, and what they saw revealed a killer no one knew existed, and a reason the Carsons had to die. The VHS tape was 27 minutes long. No sound, no editing, no title screen. Just a shaky handheld shot of a room no one had ever seen before. The floor was concrete, the walls unfinished. Pipes ran across the ceiling like veins. A single light bulb flickered above a small table, casting shadows on the back wall. And in the frame, sitting quietly, breathing heavily, was David Carson. His hands were tied, his mouth gagged, his eyes swollen, but alive. The footage rolled on. 27 minutes of quiet horror. The camera circled. Someone, the person filming, walked behind him, slow, deliberate, never speaking, never revealing their face, but their breathing calm, unshaken, not rushed. At minute 14, the camera turned toward the door, and in walked Elaine, her eyes wide, wrists bound in front of her. Behind her, a child's voice, muffled, terrified. "Mom!" Then the screen cut to static. The tape was handed over federal authorities the next morning. It had no fingerprints, no water damage, and the magnetic ribbon showed almost no signs of degradation. Rare for something over a decade old, but embedded deep in the audio, beyond human hearing, was a signal tone, like something you'd find in a timestamp or broadcast sync. It matched a pattern used in 1989 by a specific line of police dashcams. The camera used to record the tape had originally belonged to the Fairfield Police Department, which meant whoever filmed it was either a cop or had access to one's equipment. The investigation was no longer about a missing family. It was about a cover-up. In the following weeks, detectives re-examined the original 1990 crime scene reports, and in the back of a file drawer, behind 400 pages of old documentation, was a receipt dated 3 days before the family vanished. It was from a local hardware store. Paid in cash. Items purchased. Bolt cutters. 2 padlocks. A steel hinge system. Concrete sealant. 1 12-inch rotary saw blade. The name listed? D. Carson. But the signature didn't match David Carson's known handwriting. It was forged, sloppy, quick, and the clerk who rang it up, still alive, still local, was shown a photo of David Carson. He stared at it for a long moment and said, "That's not the guy who bought the tools. That guy had a birthmark on his neck." David Carson had no birthmark, but someone else did. In the spring of 1990, a man named Warren Eames was arrested in the next county over for theft, impersonation, and assault. He had served 11 months in juvenile lockup in the 70s, then vanished from official records. But his fingerprints from that arrest were still in the system. They were run against the ones found on the inside of the VHS casing. Match. Warren Eames wasn't a stranger to Fairfield. In fact, from 1988 to 1990, he'd worked part-time as a contractor, installing basements, storm bunkers, escape rooms. His work was clean, fast, and cash-based. And in May 1990, just 2 weeks before the Carsons disappeared, Warren had done a small remodel job on their home, filed under the name Martin Ellis, a name that didn't exist, a job that was never paid for, and no permit filed. Neighbors remembered seeing a white truck in the Carsons' driveway that month. Unmarked, always gone before 6 p.m. No one thought much of it, just work being done. Nothing unusual. Until now, investigators theorized this. Warren scoped the house during his work. He saw their routine, their layout, their vulnerabilities. And one night, maybe for money, maybe for something else, he broke in. The Carsons were still awake. They saw his face. And that changed everything. Instead of fleeing, he controlled the situation, forced them into the hidden bunker, one he built himself, weeks earlier, a sealed tomb beneath their own foundation, something no one would find, unless they knew where to look. Then he waited, days, maybe more. Maybe he told them someone would find them. Maybe he planned to return. Maybe he didn't. But one thing was certain. He never meant for them to survive. Elaine's sister, Margaret Lane, gave an interview 16 years later. She recalled something odd from the spring of 1990. Elaine had called me. She said she had a weird feeling about a guy doing repairs on the basement. Said he asked too many questions about the kids' school hours. I told her to call the company. She said, "I don't have a number." David paid him cash. It was the last time they spoke. The Fairfield PD reopened their internal case logs. And there it was, a break-in 2 weeks prior to the disappearance. Another home, just 6 blocks away. Similar M.O. Entry without force damage. No theft, just a family dog. Found dead, and the parents swore they saw a man with a birthmark standing outside their kitchen door at 2 a.m. No one believed them. They said it was stress. Now, it was proof. Warren Eames was officially declared a suspect. But by then, he'd been missing for a decade. No Social Security use. No known address. Just silence. Until someone made a phone call. A man, calling himself Ben, left a voicemail on a reporter's tip line. "You're looking in the wrong basement." It wasn't about robbery. He wanted to see how long they'd last. He called it the final test. That call was traced to a payphone. 400 miles away, outside a diner in Pennsylvania. Surveillance footage showed a man, roughly 50, tall, wearing a hat pulled low. No face, but under his collar, a dark mark just above the shoulder. The FBI issued a renewed warrant for Warren Eames, now classified as a fugitive with prior knowledge of the crime. Reward, $250,000. Wanted for 4 counts of murder, unlawful imprisonment, intentional concealment of human remains, evidence tampering. Angela Martin, who helped campaign for the investigation's reopening, said in an interview, they weren't lost, they were silenced. And that man built a coffin under their home, nailed it shut, and walked away like it was nothing. And the worst part? He might have done it more than once. In the months after the bunker was discovered, Fairfield changed. The Carson house, once a quiet curiosity, became a place of mourning. A crowd gathered on the hill. People left flowers, toy cars, candle-lit letters with the names Sarah and Mikey written in looping cursive. One neighbor, 84-year-old Clara Bishop, stood on her porch and wept. "We thought they left on their own. We thought they ran. But they were right there, all along, beneath the ground, just feet away, for 15 years. The discovery rattled law enforcement. Because if Warren Eames had built a death chamber under a suburban home, filmed his victims, vanished, and was never caught, who else had he done it to? And where else had he buried the truth? They began digging, not just literally, but into the past. Old property records, construction permits, abandoned work sites. In the course of 2 weeks, the FBI identified 3 additional homes where Eames had done work. All were in small towns. All were close to state borders. And all had something in common. One reported a missing child. One reported a burglary with no sign of entry. One had been abandoned overnight. Nothing ever connected them. Until now, one home in Ashland, Kentucky, had been purchased by a couple in 1991, the Hernandezes. They lived there for 6 weeks before fleeing, claiming the basement gave them nosebleeds and nightmares. When police re-examined the foundation, they found something strange. A hatch, identical in size and shape, to the one under the Carson home, but sealed, welded shut from the outside. It took 4 hours to cut through the steel. Inside, no bodies, but the walls had scratches, human fingernails embedded in concrete, and a single word carved repeatedly across the north wall. Look, they counted it, 93 times, each etched at a different height, some low, some far too high for a child. Authorities now believed Warren Eames had constructed at least 4 hidden chambers, some used, some not, but all of them meant to trap. A profile was built. They called him a mission-oriented killer, someone who didn't act out of rage but design, someone who believed death was a lesson. And the bunker? That was his classroom. But there was still one piece missing. The motive. Detective Serena Glasser led the psychological review. She found that Eames, during his teenage years, had been institutionalized for 3 months following a violent breakdown after a robbery gone wrong. The records were sealed. But a single note from a psychiatrist remained. It read, "Patient exhibits fractured cognition, fixation on enclosed spaces, believe that silence is the only true punishment." That word came up again. Silence. Glasser believed Eames used the bunkers not just to hide bodies, but to create experiments, to see how long a family could survive without sound, without hope, without time. Back in Fairfield, the Carson house was surrounded by yellow tape. Investigators returned to the basement, this time with sonar. They found something behind the western wall, a false cavity. When broken open, they discovered a bag of clothes, a box of unmarked VHS tapes, a notebook wrapped in plastic, and inside the notebook, the answers no one wanted. The first page was blank. The second began with one line. "I never wanted to hurt them, but they made a sound." The handwriting matched Warren Eames's arrest forms from 1977. It was him. He described the Carsons in detail, how he chose their home, how he learned their schedule, how he built the room without their knowledge. It was just a robbery. That's all it was supposed to be. But the boys saw me, and then the girl, and then the father tried to talk. He never wrote the words kill or murder. Instead, he used phrases like close their voices, seal the air, let them return to silence. One passage chilled even the most seasoned agents. "I told them to lie down, told them if they stayed still, it would be over." The boy cried. The mother whispered. "I asked her not to. I didn't want to, but I did." The last line of the notebook simply said, "Stillness is better." That notebook changed the case. It wasn't about evidence anymore. It was about understanding the man who walked into homes, built coffins beneath them, and walked away untouched. Then came the final tape, one of the unmarked VHS tapes, labeled only with a number 4 in pen, was reviewed by the FBI in a private session. It was silent, no victims, just a recording of the bunker ceiling. The camera placed in the corner, aimed upward, for 8 hours. No movement, no sound, except at hour 7, minute 22, a voice, a girl. "Mommy, are they coming back?" Then nothing. Forensic analysis confirmed it was Sarah Carson, 12 years old, speaking into the dark, still waiting. After that, agents stopped reviewing the remaining tapes. The official reason? Psychological hazard to personnel. Unofficially, they'd heard enough. The search for Warren Eames intensified. Interpol added him to their list. New sketches were released. Age-progressed photos. Nothing surfaced. But one lead came in from Nevada. A man matching Eames's description had bought concrete in bulk from a roadside warehouse. No address. Cash only. He gave the name Daniel Ellis. One letter off from Martin Ellis, the fake name he used on the Carson contract. Agents arrived too late. The cabin had burned to ground. Inside, no body. Just one item survived the fire. A charred piece of paper nailed to a beam. Words burned at the edges, but legible. They didn't scream. That's how I knew they were mine. He was still out there. That's what haunted the people of Fairfield. Not just the deaths, not just the tapes, but the idea that Warren Eames, the man who built tombs beneath homes, who watched families suffocate in silence, might be living quietly, unnoticed, maybe in the next town, maybe on your street, maybe right above another bunker. The burned cabin in Nevada gave no further answers. No bones, no proof, just heat, ash, and the message. They didn't scream. That's how I knew they were mine. The phrase echoed in media headlines, and it reached someone unexpected. A woman in Idaho, 63-year-old Lorna Keats, saw the quote on TV and froze because she'd heard it before. In 1991, she was working as a receptionist at a small therapy center in Pennsylvania. One of the patients, a quiet man who called himself Marlin, had come in for mandated counseling after a workplace incident, pushing a coworker down a stairwell. He was pale, wore gloves even in summer, spoke in slow, precise sentences, and during one session, while waiting in the lobby, he looked up at her and said, "You ever wonder how long someone can stay quiet before they disappear?" She'd smiled awkwardly. He followed up, "Some don't scream. That's how you know they were meant for it." She thought he was just disturbed. But after the Fairfield case made national news, she pulled out the old intake form. Marlin had no last name, but the address he listed, it was a motel, the same one where Eames was later confirmed to have stayed under a false ID. The FBI reopened dozens of inactive files, not murder cases, missing persons. And in 6 of those cases, a name surfaced. W. Ellis, a contractor, always cash, always brief. None of the disappearances were linked at the time, but the patterns were clear. A child goes missing. A house gets sold soon after. No clear evidence. No forced entry. And every time, the basement had been recently renovated. One of those homes, located outside Pittsburgh, had long since been demolished. A grocery store now stood in its place. But beneath the concrete, sonar detected anomalies, voids where earth should have settled. 3 spots, each 4 feet deep, perfect rectangles. Nothing was recovered, but they left behind something else. Radiation residue, low level, harmless, but strange, not from construction, not natural, from something electrical, a grid, maybe a battery system, something designed to keep a space livable for just a little while. A former electrical supplier came forward. He remembered an odd bulk order from 1989. Batteries, fans, a generator, all paid for in cash. No contact number. Pickup only. The man who collected the order? Birthmark. Neck. No smile. Said he was building a storm shelter for his sister's kids. Left in a white pickup truck. Angela Martin, one of the driving voices behind the reinvestigation, attended a memorial service in 2006. It had been 1 year since the Carsons were found. The local pastor read the names aloud. Candles were lit, one for each family member. David, Elaine, Sarah, Mikey, and just before the vigil ended, Angela stepped forward. She read something of her own. A quote, not from scripture, but from one of Elaine Carson's old journal entries, found in a box under her bed after the family vanished. Our house is small, but it holds laughter. Our basement is dark, but it holds winter boots and old albums. Our windows are thin, but they let the sun in. And as long as we all sit at the same table, it's home. By the time she finished, half the crowd was crying, because that's what the case had taken. Not just lives, but a home. And what replaced it? A bunker, silence, and the camera of a man who never blinked. Later that year, an independent journalist named Jonas Devlin published a deep dive report called The Hollow Below. In it, he outlined a theory that Eames wasn't just building bunkers to hide crimes. He was testing people. Each chamber had different specs, he wrote. One had airflow, one didn't. One had light, one didn't. The goal wasn't always death. The goal was to see who would break, and when. Psychological endurance under isolation. Stress reactions in silence. The body's ability to adapt in sensory absence. This wasn't just murder. It was something darker, something designed. Devlin also noted the presence of mirrored panels in 2 bunker sites. Small pieces, hidden in corners, some facing the ceiling. as if Eames wanted the victims to see themselves, even in the dark, even when no one else could. One survivor spoke anonymously, not of Eames directly, but of an experience that mirrored his methods. She'd been abducted in 1993, released 2 weeks later. No explanation, no ransom, no arrest, just left in the woods. She said, "There was a voice behind a wall. I never saw him, but he told me I had to earn quiet." That phrase stuck with agents because it appeared again. This time, carved and found in the remains of a fifth bunker. You haven't earned quiet. In 2007, a task force searched the property of a deceased recluse in Michigan, believed to be an alias Eames had used. In the attic, they found maps, dozens, all with markings, addresses, elevations, soil types, and one word stamped in red ink on each: suitable. It wasn't about people. It was about places. He was selecting homes for what they could hold, and once they did, he moved on. The last page of the Michigan files contained a rough blueprint, a spiral layout, 7 rooms, 1 corridor, a hatch, no location given, just a note, perfect conditions, dry, deep, distant, ready, and below it the date, one that hadn't come yet, September 13th, 2007. What happened that day? No one knows. But 3 counties in 3 states experienced blackouts. No clear cause, no storm, no overload, just silence for exactly 7 minutes. 7. Angela Martin visits the Carson house every year. She doesn't speak. She just leaves 4 stones at the edge of the lawn. And once, when asked why she keeps returning, she said, "Because someone built a prison beneath that house, and I need to make sure no one forgets the people he buried in it." They never caught him. That's the part that still haunts Fairfield, and Ashland, and Pittsburgh, and every other quiet town where people still wonder what might be buried beneath their homes. Not bodies, but proof that someone was there, watching, measuring, testing, and leaving behind nothing but silence. In 2008, the FBI received a tip through an encrypted online message board. The message was short: "He's still building. South. Deeper now. The new ones don't need stairs." No name, no IP trace, but it included coordinates near a dense stretch of woods just outside Knoxville, Tennessee. A search party was dispatched. At first, nothing, just pine and brush. Then they found a metal door, embedded in a rock face, almost invisible. It took 2 hours to pry it open. Inside, a corridor, narrow, cold, and at the end of it, another bunker. This one was different, larger, divided into sections. No chains, no blood, no signs of life, but clearly used. On the walls, drawings, crude, childlike, dozens of them, stick figures, rooms, hatch marks, and the same phrase, over and over: "Be quiet or you stay longer." In the farthest corner, a mattress, molded damp. Next to it, a box. Inside, fingernail clippings, bundle hair, and a photograph of a woman holding a child, neither of whom were ever identified. But on the back of the photo, a name: Darla. Tell her I didn't cry. The chamber had been abandoned for years. No fingerprints, no DNA match. But behind the mattress, scrawled directly into the concrete, were the words: "This one worked. 29 days. No sound. Record broken." He wasn't just hiding people. He was timing them. Meanwhile, the Carson case had resurfaced, not in headlines, but in the dreams of a man named Eddie Ramos, once a contractor in Ohio, now a nursing home resident in Arkansas. He claimed to have worked with a guy named Warren back in 1990. Said Warren was obsessed with below-ground airflow, talked about pressure rates and silence thresholds. Ramos never thought much of it, until the day he watched the documentary on the Carson murders. He said, "That bunker, I helped pour the concrete." He said it was for tornadoes, said it needed to be airtight. I asked why. He said, "Because storms don't scream. The FBI interviewed Ramos in person. He remembered the smell of Warren's cologne, the way he didn't blink much, the way he never raised his voice. Like he already knew how the world would end. Quiet, cold, slow. Back in Fairfield, a teacher at Sarah Carson's former school, Ms. Dana Briggs, had kept a file. Not an official one, just a folder labeled Sarah Gifted. Inside were writings, short stories, poems, doodles. One story stood out, titled, "The Man Beneath the Stairs." In it, a family is visited by a quiet man who lives under their floorboards. He eats silence. He hates clocks. He gives everyone one rule: don't speak after the lights go out. If they obey, he lets them go. If they don't, he waits until they forget how to scream. Sarah wrote that just 2 weeks before her family vanished. The handwriting was shaky. The story ended mid-sentence. He watched us sleep. That was the last line. No ending, just white space. One of the most chilling discoveries came not from a crime scene, but a library return slot in rural Kentucky. A librarian found a book returned late, 17 years late. Inside it, tucked between pages 90 and 91, was a napkin, handwritten. They left the door open one day. I didn't go. I stayed still. I knew the rules. There was no name, no trace. But the book had been checked out in 1991 to a child named Benjamin Hayes, who had gone missing the following month. Benjamin was 9 years old, walked home from school, and was never seen again. His body was never found. The only suspect, a local handyman named Ellis, was questioned and released. No connection was made to Warren Eames. Until now, the language matched, the obsession with silence, stillness, and the idea that victims weren't just captured, they were conditioned. A former FBI profiler said, this was never about rage. It was about surrender. He wanted to see if he could unmake people, strip them down to nothing but breath and bone. In 2009, a man in Missouri found an old duffel bag buried near a rest stop. Inside, rope, duct tape, gloves, a list of names. Most were scratched out, but one wasn't. Mikey Carson. Next to it, a time. 1 hour, 7 minutes. Investigators believe it was how long Mikey lasted before making a sound. That's when Eames stopped the timer. That's when he knew who would live and who wouldn't. Every part of the case, scream method, deliberate pacing, map movement, and worst of all, he filmed it. Only 4 tapes were ever confirmed. But one internal report estimated the possibility of over 30 recordings based on recovered tape packaging. Some were blank. Some were never found. One was intercepted in 2010, sent anonymously to a law office in Florida. No return address, no explanation, just a single word on the label. Observe. The footage was grainy. A single camera. Static shot. A metal room. A girl. Mid-teens. She sat in the corner, rocked slowly, held her breath when the light flickered. No words were spoken, but the timer on the screen ran for 6 hours. And at the end, a voice. Male, calm, almost sympathetic. Good, you're learning. Then the screen went black. The girl in the video has never been identified. She's never come forward. Or she never left. Angela Martin said in an interview, it wasn't just our town. It was our faith in control. That you can lock your doors and be safe. That your basement is for boxes, not coffins. She paused. That a man wouldn't spend his life testing how long it takes a mother to go silent. That's what Eames did. He studied grief, not from the outside, but from beneath, where the air doesn't move, where time stops, where your voice no longer matters. In the end, the house was torn down. Not because it had to be, not because it was structurally unsound, but because no one could live above that bunker again. The property sat vacant for nearly a year. Then, quietly, with no announcement or ceremony, bulldozers arrived. Within 2 days, it was gone. The hill was leveled, the trees replanted. A plaque was placed, just a small one with 4 names. No last name, no details, just David Elaine, Sarah, Mikey, and the dates they were last seen alive. The town of Fairfield wanted to move on, but silence has a way of lingering, especially the kind that's intentional. In 2012, a state records audit uncovered something strange. A permit request filed in 1989 for subterranean storage in a residential area just outside Cleveland, signed with the initials W. It had never been approved, never followed up, but the location it listed was less than a mile from a home where another family vanished in 1991, a family no one had ever connected to Warren Eames before. The Garvins, 2 parents, 1 daughter, gone without a trace. Their house had long been demolished, replaced by a warehouse, but the property records, now seen in a different light, revealed that shortly before their disappearance, the Garvins had hired a man named Martin Ellis to install structural reinforcements in the lower level. The contract was signed in pencil. No business listed. No receipts. But the signature matched the one on the Carson remodeling file. A team was dispatched to the warehouse. They scanned the concrete with ground-penetrating radar, and what they found shook the entire investigation. A void, rectangular, 10 feet below the foundation. Inside, sealed beneath layers of brick, was a room, not accessible, but very real. The owner of the warehouse was furious, said no one had ever told him the land had been used before. When asked if he ever heard anything strange, he paused. Sometimes the dogs wouldn't go near the far wall. One of them scratched at it until her paws bled. He never thought anything of it. Until now, back in Fairfield, Angela Martin was interviewed for a documentary. They asked her one final question. What do you think he wanted? She looked off camera, silent for a long moment, then said, he wanted them to stop being people. He wanted to make them still, like dolls in a room. And if they begged or cried or screamed, it meant they still had something he couldn't control. She paused again. So he made silence the punishment, and quiet the proof they belonged to him. A year later, a documentary aired. Beneath Us, a 2-part series covering the Carson case and the hidden bunkers across the Midwest. Viewers from across the country sent in letters. Some claimed to recognize Eames. Others said they lived in homes where doors didn't line up right, where vents echoed at night. One letter stood out. Handwritten, postmarked from Arkansas. He was in our house once. My brother let him in. Said he was checking our pipes. I told Mom he gave me the wrong name. She said not to be rude. I never saw her again. The return address was fake, but the handwriting matched a missing persons report from 1994. The girl was never found. Agents believe Eames may have constructed as many as 12 bunkers. 6 discovered, 3 suspected, 3 still unknown. And the tapes? Only 5 ever surfaced. But one final tape was mailed anonymously in 2015, not to law enforcement, to a church. Inside, a 6-hour recording. Dark, no movement. Then, around hour 5, a voice, a man's, saying, "Are you still there?" No reply. Then, "I need you to make a sound, or I'll come back tomorrow." Then silence. The remaining hour, static. The audio analysis showed no signs of manipulation. The voice was clean, and it matched previous recordings attributed to Warren Eames. That was the last confirmed contact. In 2016, a tip came in from a woman who had grown up in Fairfield. She was just 7 when the Carsons vanished. Her father had worked in plumbing and knew many of the local contractors. One of them, she only remembered him as Warren, had once sat at her dinner table. She said he was polite, quiet, but during dessert, he asked her mother, "Do you ever wonder how long your daughter could last in the dark?" They thought it was a joke. They never saw him again. She filed that memory away for years, until the news broke, until she saw his face, until she realized a man in her kitchen had once built chambers not to protect people, but to remove them. The final page of the FBI's classified Eames case file included a psychological summary. It stated, "Subject demonstrates extreme control fixation, view of the human voice as weakness, uses environmental manipulation as punishment, demonstrates no regard for recognition, fame, or monetary gain. Motive appears entirely rooted in psychological dominance and silent endurance. In other words, he didn't do it for thrill, or rage, or revenge. He did it because he could. He made quiet into a weapon. He turned basements into cages. And he made families, entire families, vanish, without a scream, without a trace, without a chance. The Carson family was laid to rest in a private ceremony in 2006. No cameras, no speeches, just 4 caskets, 4 stones, and one final message carved into marble. We spoke, we laughed, we lived, and even in silence we remained. Angela Martin still visits that grave once a year. She brings a small lantern, a single daisy, and she reads from a children's book that Tess used to love, the one Sarah once borrowed from the school library before it went missing, Where the Dark Things Sleep. She reads it aloud, because silence was how he won, and speaking is how they're never forgotten.